The table was set with polished silverware and glasses that caught the warm light overhead. But beneath the neat arrangement, tension hung like smoke. I sat at the far end, opposite my son, Adam, watching him cut into his steak with unnecessary force. His wife, Kara, had invited me, though I suspected it was less out of kindness and more to show her parents how well their daughter had married. Kara's parents sat beside her, offering polite conversation about property values in Flagstaff. I listened quietly, nodding when appropriate, sipping water to keep my hands steady. I had learned long ago that in this house my voice rarely carried weight. Adam set down his fork and looked straight at me. His tone was casual, but his words struck like a slap. "You're the most useless mom I have." The room went still. Kara smirked, her painted lips curling as if she had been waiting for this moment. Her father shifted uncomfortably, while her mother looked down at her plate. No one rushed to soften the blow. I felt the words settle heavy in my chest. For a moment, images flickered late nights grading papers when I still worked at the library, the months I saved to pay Adam's tuition, the checks I wrote when he and Kara fell behind on their mortgage. Each sacrifice was invisible to them, swept aside like crumbs brushed from the table. My first instinct was to defend myself, to remind him of every bill I had covered, every debt I had lifted. But something in me stilled. I had no need to list my worth to a son who refused to see it, so I smiled, slow and faint, and pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against tile seemed louder than his insult. Kara's smirk faltered just slightly, confusion flickering in her eyes as I reached for my purse. I stood tall, not with anger but with resolve. Without a word, I walked past them all, through the archway, and out the front door into the cooling Arizona night. The desert air carried the scent of juniper and dust. I breathed deeply, each step away from that house lighter than the last. By the time I reached my car, one thought had already taken root. Tonight would be the last time I allowed them to measure my worth. When I drove away from Adam's house that night, memories pressed in like shadows following me down the empty streets. I thought of the years when it had only been the two of us, me and my boy. After Robert's accident, Adam was just 12. I worked double shifts at the library, taking on weekend archiving projects for extra pay. There were nights I fell asleep with a red pen in my hand, pages of old manuscripts waiting to be cataloged. I told myself it was worth it. Adam needed stability. I cut coupons, skipped vacations, and delayed repairs on my own home so I could save for his future. When college came, I paid every bill Northern Arizona University sent. Even when tuition climbed, I found a way, dipping into the small inheritance my mother left me. Adam graduated with no debt, and I carried the pride quietly, never reminding him what it cost. Years later, when he and Kara wanted to buy their first house, I gave them nearly all the savings I had set aside, $10,000 wired into their account with a note that said, "Consider this your start." They thanked me then, but only once, and after that, it became an expectation, not a gift. Kara's emergency surgery a few years later drained me again. Insurance covered part of it, but I handed over another $5,000 without hesitation. I told myself, family helps family, even when it meant putting off my retirement plans, even when it meant another year of careful budgets and canned soup dinners. Through it all, Adam brushed off my efforts. "You're just being a mom," he'd say, as if that explained everything, as if my sacrifices were no more than duty. Kara never said thank you twice. She treated my help like a bill already paid. I carried the weight alone, convincing myself that one day they would understand, that one day my son would see the truth of all I had given. But standing in the dark that night, I felt something shift. Their words had stripped away the illusion, and what remained was a decision I could no longer avoid. Back in my quiet condo, the silence wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow pad of paper and a pen, my hands trembling as I began to write. One by one, the numbers came back. Tuition payments, $35,000. House down payment, $10,000. Mortgage help, nearly $60,000 over the years, month after month to keep them afloat. Medical bills for Kara. Business loans Adam never repaid. Holidays I funded when they insisted they had nothing. By the time I totaled the columns, the sum stared back at me over $150,000. The number looked unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life, but it was mine. Years of savings, the safety I should have had for my old age, scattered to keep them steady. And tonight, after everything, my son had looked me in the eye and called me useless. I laid the pen down and pressed my palm flat against the paper. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I had poured myself out until nothing remained, and it had never been enough. A line had to be drawn. No more checks. No more quiet rescues. No more pretending that giving would buy me love or respect. Fear whispered at the edges. What if they hated me for it? But even stronger was the certainty that I could not go on this way. By morning, my decision was set in stone. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds, and my phone buzzed restlessly on the nightstand. I reached for it, expecting perhaps a message from a friend or the library. Instead, the screen lit with a number that made my chest tighten. 40 missed calls, all from Adam. Buried among them sat a single text, sent just after dawn. One word, raw and stripped of pride. Please. I stared at it for a long while, the echo of his voice from the night before still ringing in my head. Useless. The word had been sharp, deliberate. And now he wanted something again. My fingers hovered over the keys, and for once I didn't feel the familiar tug of guilt. Instead, I typed with steady hands. Useless is busy. I pressed send. The message delivered instantly, a simple line that closed a chapter years in the making. Later, I imagined the scene unfolding in their house. Kara pacing the kitchen, voice sharp with fury. You humiliated her. Adam, do you realize what you've done? She would have thrown her hands in the air, her smirk from last night replaced with panic. And Adam. He'd admit what he never told me, that the mortgage was already 2 months behind, that the bank had called twice last week, that without my quiet transfers. The numbers no longer added up. Their safety net had always been me, stretched thin until it tore. And now that it was gone, they were left staring into the void I'd refused to fill. I set my phone face down on the table, a calm settling into me. For the first time in decades, their chaos was theirs alone, not mine to shoulder. And as their panic deepened, I felt the weight lifting from my own shoulders, making space for something new to begin. By mid-afternoon, the silence had grown too heavy. I knew Adam wouldn't stop calling, and Kara wouldn't stop needling from the shadows. They'd keep circling like hawks until I gave in. But this time, I wouldn't hand them money. I would hand them truth. I opened the family group chat, a thread where birthdays and holiday photos were occasionally shared, but more often sat dormant. Kara's parents were there too, polite figures who always seemed to approve of their daughter's choices without asking questions. My fingers hovered before I began typing, years of resentment funneling into words at last. For more than 2 decades, I've kept Adam and Kara afloat. I wrote, I paid $35,000 for Adam's tuition at Northern Arizona University. I gave $10,000 for the down payment on your Flagstaff house. I've covered over $60,000 in mortgage payments when you couldn't. I handed over $5,000 for Kara's surgery. Add in loans and emergencies, you've received over $150,000 of my savings. I paused, then continued. I did this because I believed in family. But last night, Adam looked me in the eye and called me useless. That ends today. I pressed send and set the phone down. The screen lit up within seconds. Kara's mother responded first. Is this true? A minute later, Adam. Kara, explain yourselves. The dots blinked as Adam typed and erased. Typed and erased. Finally, he wrote, she's exaggerating. But Kara's father cut in sharply. Your mother just listed exact amounts. We had no idea she supported you like this. And you insult her. Shameful. The chat went quiet again. The silence louder than any outburst. I could imagine Kara's face flushed with fury. Adam pacing with humiliation burning in his chest. They had been exposed, not just to me, but to their own allies. My phone buzzed with a private message from Kara. Minutes later, how dare you drag my parents into this? You're trying to ruin us. I didn't respond. Their ruin wasn't my doing. It was the truth, laid bare at last. And for the first time in years, I felt no need to defend myself. The numbers spoke for me. Each dollar, a record of love twisted into debt. The air in my condo felt clearer, as though a window had been opened after decades of stale air. I knew the storm would rage in their house that night, and I no longer cared to shield them from it, though I wasn't there to see it. The details reached me soon enough. That night, in Adam's house. My message had detonated like a charge left ticking for years. Kara was the first to unleash her fury. You couldn't keep your mouth shut. Could you? She shouted, her voice carrying through the open kitchen. You had to humiliate her. And now look at us. Adam fired back. Red-faced. Me. You were the one who kept pushing me to ask for more. Every time we were behind, you said, just call Mom. She'll fix it. You wanted her money as much as I did. The argument spiraled. Chairs scraping, voices rising. In the middle of it all, a knock at the door broke through. When Adam opened it, an envelope lay on the mat, stamped with the bank's seal. He tore it open with shaking hands. Foreclosure? 2 months unpaid? The bank unwilling to wait longer? The weight of it hit him harder than any words could. Kara snatched the notice, her eyes wide. You told me you were handling it. I was until she stopped paying. Adam shouted, waving the letter. You think I can cover this on my salary alone? Later, Kara's parents called, voices tight with disappointment. They had read every word of my message and seen the figures. You wasted your chance with her, her father said coldly. Don't come to us for help now. Kara broke down in tears, but not for me, for the loss of status, of the image she guarded so fiercely. Adam sat slumped at the table. The foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist, and while their voices cracked and accusations flew, I sat in my condo across town, the quiet of the evening wrapping around me. Their chaos no longer reached my doorstep. It belonged to them, and to them alone. The following morning, the phone rang while I was making tea. I expected another barrage from Adam, but the name on the screen steadied me, Edward. My brother's voice carried the same gravelly strength it always had. Kid, he said, using the nickname he'd never abandoned. I'm proud of you. You carried them too long. About damn time you let go. I felt my throat tighten. Edward had seen more of life's battles than most, and his approval cut through the doubts that sometimes whispered at the edges of my resolve. You don't owe them anything, he went on. Not a cent more. They needed to hear it. Later, Edward called Adam himself. He told me afterward how it went. I laid it out plain. He said, your mother paid your tuition, your mortgage, your wife's bills, and you called her useless. Shame on you. Adam had exploded. shouting that I exaggerated, that Edward didn't understand. But Edward stood firm. She kept your life stitched together, and you repay her with contempt. You need to look hard at yourself. The line went dead after that, Adam slamming the phone down. But I knew Edward's words had landed, even if my son refused to admit it. For the first time in years, I felt I wasn't standing alone. Someone else had spoken the truth I had swallowed too long, and there was no taking it back. The cracks in Adam's world were only beginning to show. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling. I didn't need to witness directly to understand. Word travels quickly in a town like Flagstaff, and Adam had always made sure people knew his name. That pride, that polished image of the confident provider, it began to crumble piece by piece. His company repossessed the equipment he had leased for a project that never materialized. Without it, deadlines were missed. Contracts slipped away, and soon his phone was filled with messages from creditors demanding payment. What once sounded like opportunity now echoed with desperation. Kara, so eager to flaunt their success, began to retreat. She stopped posting photographs of their home, stopped inviting her friends over. When whispers started about foreclosure, she made excuses, blaming the economy, blaming the market, anything but Adam's choices. But the embarrassment clung to her. And in social circles, where appearances mattered more than truth, she felt stripped bare. For Adam, the humiliation was sharper. He had built his identity on being the man who didn't need anyone, least of all his aging mother. Now the same friends he once bragged to avoided him at restaurants, nodded stiffly in grocery store aisles. His shoulders sagged. His voice grew clipped. I heard from neighbors that he no longer carried himself with swagger. He was seen pacing outside late at night, phone pressed to his ear, begging for extensions on payments. Each refusal chipped away at the armor he had worn so proudly. And though part of me ached to see my son fall so hard, a stronger part understood this was the reckoning long overdue. He had leaned on me until I could no longer stand, and now he was learning what it meant to bear the weight alone. The mask he had worn for years had cracked, and behind it stood a man I barely recognized. But while Adam stumbled, my own steps were beginning to find firmer ground. As Adam's world unraveled, mine began to quietly bloom. For the first time in decades, my paycheck and pension were mine alone. The weight of endless requests no longer pressed on me, and I could finally breathe without wondering what bill would appear next with my name on it. I returned to the Flagstaff Library, not as an employee, but as a volunteer. The scent of old books and the hum of young students reminded me of the years I had once loved, years when knowledge felt like a gift to share rather than a burden to escape. I shelved volumes, read to children on Saturday mornings, and left each shift with a fullness I hadn't known in years. On weekends, I joined a hiking group in Sedona. The red rocks rose against the sky, and the trails tested my legs but steadied my spirit. I found friends there, people who saw me not as a wallet to open, but as a companion, laughing with me as the desert wind whipped our hats and the sun warmed our backs. At home, I dug my hands into soil and planted a desert garden sage, succulents, and hardy blooms that thrived in the Arizona heat. Each sprout was a promise to myself, a reminder that growth can happen even late in life. Edward visited one afternoon, sitting on my porch with coffee. He looked out over the small garden and said simply, "Family isn't who drains you. Family is who lifts you." His words sank deep, grounding me in a truth I had already begun to live. And with every passing day, I knew I was building a life that was finally mine. Months passed before I heard Adam's voice again. One evening, As the sun dipped low behind the San Francisco peaks, my phone rang. His number appeared, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I pressed accept. Curiosity, heavier than hesitation. "Mom," he began, his voice hollow, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. "We're losing everything. Kara's talking about leaving. I don't know what to do." I listened quietly, my hand resting on the arm of my chair. He spoke of overdue bills, of friends who no longer answered his calls, of a life that felt like it was slipping through his fingers. There was a time when such words would have set me in motion, scrambling to fix what was broken, but I had already fixed enough. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," I said, steady and calm, "but I can't help you, Adam, not this time." The silence on the line stretched, heavy and sharp. At last, he muttered something I couldn't catch and ended the call. I set the phone down, my chest tight but not broken. It was not cruelty that guided me now, but clarity. I had been called useless, yet it was my sacrifices that had held his life together for decades. Without me, it collapsed. Not because I withdrew too soon, but because they had built nothing solid of their own. Weeks later, I hosted a dinner in my small condo. The table was crowded with neighbors from my building, a friend from the library, and 2 women from the hiking group. Laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls, the kind of laughter that comes without expectation or demand. I served a simple meal, and no one measured my worth by what I put on the table. We shared stories, poured wine, and lingered long after the plates were cleared. As I looked around, I realized this was family, the kind chosen with care, the kind that gave as much as it received. I wasn't useless. I never had been. I was the foundation. And now I had built a life where I stood steady on my own. And when the night ended, and the door closed softly behind my guests, I felt only peace.